Dr. Steven McCabe from Birmingham City University. The announcement this week that John Lewis will not reopen in Birmingham is a big blow to the city.
Well, quite clearly so. It was the, if you like, the what's called the anchor store for the Grand Central, which of course in the old days is called New Street, which was a pretty amazing sort of transformation of something like £750 million. The fact that that store is not like to open is quite incredible, but perhaps unsurprising given the current context. The reduced footfall through New Street Station during COVID, but I believe that the sort of the sales figures were not brilliant even before the current crisis.
I must admit, I only ever used John Lewis to walk through it when I was going through the station from where I get off my train at Snow Hill to get to my office for my day job. It was just a perfect walk through. Never bought anything from there. A lot of people who I work with said they didn't buy anything from there, and I think it's a measure as well about how most of us do our shopping online. And given the fact that we're not going to be heading into Birmingham city centre as much as we were, even once the pandemic kind of eases, I think these factors come into consideration when big corporations make these decisions.
Well, clearly so. I mean, John Lewis, this expression has been sort of bandied about. It's the bellwether, but it was the store that for quite a while could do no wrong, even during the last financial crisis of 2008, which seems like an eternity ago, given everything that's going on. They did pretty well. Its sales figures in recent years have not been as good. Mainly because, of course, it was experiencing the same phenomena as you've just indicated that every other high street retailer is undergoing. You can get it cheaper and with more convenience by shopping online. We in the UK are one of the most enthusiastic online nations, and of course, what COVID has done, that's given that sort of a turbo boost. So these are probably decisions, to be fair, that were probably going to be made in the sort of the longer term. And of course, all commercial organisations have to sort of to be guided by their profits. So this probably would have happened in, well, who knows, maybe 5-10 years down the line, and it would have been difficult given the amount of sort of publicity that surrounded this one. But all sorts of things are happening at the moment. I saw something funny enough this morning which suggested that, and it's pretty dreadful, 250,000 retail jobs could be lost due to high street stores not reopening, or sort of maybe reopening and not sort of finding the footfall. It's down, perhaps unsurprisingly, by something like 50% compared to sort of to previous years.
What about the building though, Grand Central? I mean, I'm no architect, of course, but it does seem that the futuristic design of Grand Central, which took them long enough to do, of course, a great disruption to many commuters into Birmingham. It seemed to me that the building was designed to have a big store like John Lewis as its almost its centerpiece.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, it was an amazing sort of transformation. New Street, it kept going with pretty much minimal disruption to the rail passengers. But yeah, I mean, the shopping centre as was, in fact, I remember that being built back in sort of the late 60s. I'm old enough to sort of to have seen sort of it had become a pretty appalling place. And so what they did by sort of, if you like, taking the roof off and putting a sort of glass roof instead, this is Grand Central in its own sort of way, and they knocked down a tower block. So it was a local authority block, I believe, that they knocked down to create the sort of the iconic building that's there, or at least the sort of the silver foil, if you like, for want of a better expression. Yeah, so it was amazing because prior to sort of to the redevelopment, New Street Station was a pretty grotty place. So John Lewis was part of something which was sort of heralding a new dawn for Birmingham, and we were all rightly proud. The fact that as we're now coming to terms of the recognition that that building may not reopen, and the fact is that I cannot see any other sort of major retailer coming into it. They might be able to let some of the units, if they so convert it, but dare I say it, even the sort of the Bullring was starting to experience difficulties in sort of renting out some of its stores. And of course, we've seen some recent use of big retail developers going into administration into just a couple of weeks ago. So that tells you that the sort of the future in the sort of the very near to medium term is going to be extremely difficult for the high street and retailing in general.
But for the city as well, when you think about it, that one of its major shopping centres is closing, will not reopen at the gateway to the city, which is Grand Central. Most people come into Birmingham through the old New Street station into Grand Central, a big gaping hole there. We're going to have to wait until possibly into the next decade before the HS2 station is completed at Curzon Street, attracting people to the city. And we're supposed to be hosting the Commonwealth Games in 2 years' time. This is not good PR, if anything, for the city.
Well, it's not. No, I mean, quite clearly, a major retailer, I mean, Debenhams has gone into administration, but I believe is still in operation. So its future is very uncertain. You've then left with Selfridge, which was not exactly, in my opinion, it's not someone I would shop, because it's a younger, more sort of high-spending sort of youth, as it were. You've got sort of up Corporation Street, House of Fraser, which that its future again is very uncertain. You walk down New Street, and New Street's looking a bit tired. And I mentioned a moment ago that the Bullring, they're probably going to have quite a few empty units in the future. Yeah, no, it's not a good advert, and quite clearly the sort of the Commonwealth Games. There must be a big question about the sort of the ability to bring that in on time, because of course I don't believe that any construction work would have taken place for a couple of months during the sort of lockdown. So of course that's probably behind. So we're going to have to spend a whole lot of money. That there is long experience of what happens. Because of course Commonwealth Games or sporting events are a bit like Christmas, they can't move. So of course you then have to spend more and more money to sort of make sure that they're ready for the sort of the opening date. And this is in a sort of city, the local authority of which is experiencing really severe financial problems. And that's not going to go away anytime soon. Indeed, there was a report which I was aware of a couple of weeks ago, that all local authorities have had to spend phenomenal amounts of money dealing with the COVID crisis, and of course they were asking government or central government for more funding. So you've got a sort of pretty noxious cocktail, almost, if you wish, the sort of the perfect storm. So assuming the Commonwealth Games do take place, that they could be coming into a city centre. With at least one and maybe even a couple of major stores and many of the high street retail premises that are empty. It's not a good look.
Are there any positives potentially to come from this?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously it will end, and we'll look back on this as a peculiar time. I mean, nobody could have foreseen this. I mean, what I do see in the sort of long term is that I think that people have realised that it takes a crisis to make you reassess your priorities. But I think people are much, well, in the future, will be much less willing to move about and commute. So what that may mean is that, of course, if you are able to work from home, and I appreciate that not everyone can, then you don't need to go into city centres, and you can have your shopping delivered online, which of course the online retailers have done well at this. But of course people do like to sort of go and walk about and see different things. So of course I think there may be an increase in localism, independent shops reopening in the sort of the shop units, which of course will be available. So landlords will probably have to cut their cost accordingly and reduce the rents. But I think that there's always sufficient sort of entrepreneurialism and innovation of people who've got wonderful ideas, and go into your local sandwich shop and buying something that, as I say, was handmade, ideally using local ingredients, maybe clothes that were sort of made locally. So perhaps we're going to become a much more sort of insular nation, and the wider world that once beckoned seems to have closed down considerably. But again, I'm still looking at it as a positive. So maybe we'll return to a world that, we don't remember, but in the sort of the 1940s and 50s, a much smaller Britain, as it were, or one that that's a lot less internationalist, which has its negatives. I do accept, but one, as I say, where we have pride in sort of the things that we do locally.
And just quickly, while I've got you on the subject of retail and shops, the potential news that we could all be forced to wear masks it could be coming soon. I mean, your take on that?
Well, I will happily admit, and I wrote this right at the outset. The World Health Organization was saying this from the outset. Well, they said a couple of things: track and trace, which we're still sort of trying to get a head around. But I mean, you go to the Far East, and it's a cultural thing. It's de rigueur that particularly during the winter, people wear masks, not so much to protect themselves, but to sort of to avoid passing things on to other people. So it's very, very sensible. We already do it on public transport. And I think any time that we sort of go outside our front door, there's no reason why we can't do it. We're in the sort of midst of a global pandemic. And in this country, there have been, if you look at the excess deaths, 65,000 people have died. That should tell us that we sort of need to sort of do things very differently. And if wearing a mask helps to reduce the number of deaths in the future, then I'm fully supportive.
Dr. Steven McCabe, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.